Hello everybody, welcome to MH3, which stands for Murders She Investigated Unsolved. If you are new to MH3, you are invited to subscribe this channel. This is the final episode for the MH370 series. With all the discoveries and analysis presented in the previous 14 videos, we are finally in a position to tell how the hijacking of MH370 took place. The hijacking to be described will be divided into 4 parts, using 4 key events. On the screen is a table showing the 4 parts and the event related. Part 1, the event was MH370 took off. Part 2 was Zahari radioed the ATC that MH370 reached flight level 350. Part 3 was Farik replied to an inquiry. Part 4 was Kuala Lumpur ATC radioed MH370 to contact the Ho Chi Minh ATC. Let's begin. Zahari hurried back to the cockpit. Liang Xiyan followed him. Farik had been waiting for Zahari's return anxiously. The ATC instructed MH370 to take off 2 minutes before. Failure to take off upon instruction was a serious violation of the safety code. As Zahari was sitting down, he told Farik to take off. At 00:42:43 seconds, MH370 finally took off, climbing towards 35,000 feet, a pre-approved cruise level. When buckling himself up, Zahari noticed that Liang Xiyan did not bother with his seatbelt. He was using his cell phone. With displeasure, Zahari told Liang Xiyan to fasten his seatbelt. Liang Xiyan sat in a spare chair behind Farik. When Zahari warned him about the seatbelt, he had just finished sending his wife in China a brief text. He told her he finally boarded the plane and would arrive in the morning. Liang Xiyan put his cell phone into his pocket and buckled himself up. At 00:42:50 seconds, Zahari radioed the Kuala Lumpur ATC the departure. On board MH370, everybody was buckled up and remained seated during the initial ascent. In the business class cabin, there were 35 seats, but only 10 of them were occupied. Additionally, there were 3 cabin crew members in the business class cabin, including the in-flight supervisor, who was a 55-year-old man with 35 years of experience. Gan Fuxian was in seat 2A, a window seat. Next to him was an aisle seat, unoccupied. Gan Fuxian could access the aisles with ease. Seat 2A was 3 or 4 steps away from the EE bay hatch. At 01:01:17 seconds, Zahari radioed the Kuala Lumpur ATC that MH370 had reached its cruise level of 35,000 feet. 4 seconds later, the Kuala Lumpur ATC replied to acknowledge the receipt of Zahari's report. At cruise level, people on board were allowed to unbuckle themselves and move around if necessary. Flight attendants began to serve the passengers. In the cockpit, Liang Xiyan unbuckled himself. He stood up, turned, opened the cockpit door, and walked out into the business class cabin. The cockpit door closed behind him and locked up automatically. Zahari thought Liang Xiyan was on his assignment. He did not interfere with Liang Xiyan's move. Liang Xiyan walked down the aisle several steps to where the E bay hatch was. He bent to lift the rock and the hatch cover under the rock. Then he climbed down a ladder and descended into the E bay. The passengers and the cabin crew in the business class cabin witnessed Liang Xiyan's unusual move. Everybody assumed whatever happened in front of their eyes was legitimate. After all, Liang Xiyan followed Zahari climbing out of that hatch 20 minutes before. Zahari led Liang Xiyan in the cockpit. Liang Xiyan's return to the E bay seemed normal. There was no reason to doubt Zahari was not aware of Liang Xiyan's actions. Once in the E bay, Liang Xiyan took out the toolbox he left there when boarding the plane. He opened the toolbox and picked up the tool he needed. He closed the box and put it back in the secured corner. Next, he found the cockpit door control and turned the power off. Then he hid himself in a dim corner close to the hatch ladder. In the cockpit, the moment Liang Xiyan turned off the power, both Zahari and Farik heard a bang coming from the cockpit door. Zahari went to the door to check. The door had become an ordinary door. Zahari frowned. He told Farik the door was no longer secured. He would go down to the E bay to check what was going on. Zahari left the cockpit. In the E bay, Liang Xiyan was waiting in a dim corner. He saw Zahari's back moving down the ladder. As soon as Zahari landed and turned around, Liang Xiyan used his tool, pointing at Zahari's chest. Zahari fell down and passed out almost at the same time. Farik was in the cockpit by himself. All of a sudden, MH370 received an inquiry over a radio transmission. It was from Malaysia's Air Force. The Air Force wanted to know the flight level of MH370. What a surprise! Farik made an sound and asked himself why. He paused a second or two. At 0107:56 seconds, Farik gave the Air Force his flight level of 35,000 feet. Farik figured the inquiry from the Malaysia's Air Force should be legitimate. He saw no harm in giving out that information to the Air Force. At the headquarters of the Malaysia Air Force, the reply from Farik eased the anxieties of those from the Najib circle. Farik's voice was evidence that Zahari was not in the cockpit. As far as the Najib circle was concerned, things were progressing according to the plan. Back to the E bay, Zahari was on the floor, unconscious. Liang Xuyan put the tool in his pocket and moved on. He found another circuit breaker and turned its power off. This circuit breaker, when on, was to operate the latches to the oxygen mask boxes in the passenger cabins. For MH370, the overhead passenger cabins were fitted with passenger service unit above each seat row. Each of the passenger service units was hinged and secured by a magnetic latch that was electrically controlled. In the event of cabin depressurization, the magnetic latches would be electrically released to allow the oxygen masks inside to drop for passengers and the cabin crew to use. Liang Xuyan turned the circuit breaker off from the Yi bay. It meant the latches would not be released, and the oxygen masks would not drop automatically. Without the oxygen mask when needed, people generally die from hypoxia within a few minutes. So was Liang Xuyan aware what he did amounted to murder? After all, it is common knowledge that depressurization and a lack of oxygen leads to hypoxia and death in minutes. There is no evidence that Liang Xuyan was fully aware of what he had done, nor can we assume he possessed this common knowledge, because this sort of common knowledge has not been a part of China's school or social education system. In the Yi bay, Liang Xuyan was to turn off the power to the satellite connection next. The circuit breaker was an obscure one to an untrained eye, but being a wireless telecommunication engineer with prior specific training, it was easy for Liang Xuyan. He went to rack E11 and broke the circuit. Malaysia Airlines subscribed to Inmarsat's classic aerial satellite services. Therefore, the satellite communications for MH370 included audio and text communications, ACARS data reporting every 30 minutes, and in-flight entertainment equipment connectivity. The last ACARS report Malaysia Airlines received from MH370 was at 0107. In other words, Liang Xuyan turned the power off to the satellite connection after 0107 minutes. As a result, the flight crew in the cockpit were unable to use satellite phones or text communication to exchange messages with the ground station. Nor would the in-flight intercom work. Furthermore, the aircraft would stop sending periodical ACARS report to the ground station. Cutting the power off to the satellite connection also meant passengers lost their in-flight entertainment. The problem would be immediately noticeable. Liang Xuyan had to return to the cockpit quickly before any of the flight crew reacted to interfere with his job. The in-flight supervisor saw Liang Xuyan getting out of the hatch by himself. He was concerned. Where was Zahari? As the in-flight supervisor was wondering what was going on, he saw a Chinese seated at 2A, leaving his seat. walking fast towards the cockpit. Liang Xiyan followed behind. To the in-flight supervisor's surprise, the Chinese man opened the cockpit door easily. Both Gan Fuxiang and Liang Xiyan entered the cockpit. The in-flight supervisor rushed to the cockpit door and tried to open it. He discovered that the door was locked from inside. Outside the cockpit door, there was an intercom reaching the pilots inside the cockpit. The in-flight supervisor picked up the handset, only to find the line was dead. He remembered Zahari was still down at the EE bay. He decided to find Zahari first. As he approached the hatch, he felt chilly, dizzy, and nauseous. He tried to sit down first, but fell as he became unconscious. Gan Fuxian entered the cockpit and went straight to Zahari's seat. The first thing he did was to put on the oxygen mask. Farik was stunned. He turned to face Gan Fuxian. At this moment, Liang Xiyan already locked up the cockpit door from inside. Again, he used his tool and pointed it at Farik. Farik collapsed in his chair. Liang Xiyan quickly put on his oxygen mask. Farik was not totally out yet. He saw the two hijackers putting on the oxygen masks. Immediately he sensed the duo planned to depressurize the cabin to murder everybody else on board. Farik wanted to let the world know that MH370 was hijacked, but he was weak and losing consciousness. How could he send out the hijacking message? With pain and difficulty, Farik gathered his last strength he had. He moved to put his hand into his pocket. He reached his cell phone and pressed a button. Farik's cell phone was turned on. This was the last thing Farik did before he died from hypoxia. Gan Fuxian depressurized the cabin. The oxygen masks did not drop for passengers and the cabin crew. In less than a minute, other than the duo, everybody else on board was feeling dizzy and losing consciousness. One by one, they died from hypoxia. At 01:19 and 26 seconds, the Kuala Lumpur ATC radioed MH370. MH370 was instructed to contact Ho Chi Minh's ATC using frequency 120.9. In the cockpit, Liang Xiyan was in charge of the radio communication. Since he had received some prior training, he acknowledged the ATC's instruction with necessary repeats, such as Ho Chi Minh and frequency 120.9. To cover up his Chinese accent, Liang Xiyan added static noise in the radio communication. The Kuala Lumpur ATC did not detect anything unusual in the MH370 acknowledgement. As far as Gan Fuxian was concerned, the Kuala Lumpur ATC instruction was a signal for him to begin his flight mission. He turned the flight heading slightly to the right. As soon as MH370 passed the waypoint IGARI, Gan Fuxian turned the transponder off. It was 01:20:34 of March 8, 2014. Gan Fuxiang retrieved his flight plan that was already stored in the flight management system. He replaced the MH370 flight plan with his own flight plan. The aircraft began to climb up until it reached 43,000 feet high. For a Boeing 777-200 model aircraft, its service ceiling was 43,100 feet. Once Gan Fuxiang reached 43,000 feet, he then began to drop his flight level until he was flying at 31,000 feet high. While changing his altitude, the aircraft was constantly turning left until it made a complete U-turn. Then, it flew across the Malay Peninsula towards Malacca Strait. At 01:52:27 seconds, a hilltop on the east side of Penang Island, a mobile phone tower registered a signal hit. There was no communication record following the hit. Later, the registered signal was traced to Farouk's cell phone number. The signal hit without further communications suggested that Farouk's cell phone was in the on mode. The Najib government tried to hide Farouk's cell phone signal hit from the public. The attempt failed. An anonymous American tipped a journalist off, who in turn reported it. In 2018, Farouk's cell phone signal was briefly described in the MH370 final report. There was no associated comments or analysis, as if the Malaysia government was clueless why Farouk's cell phone was in the on mode. This is all on the hijacking. If you are new to MSI, you are invited to subscribe this channel. If you are already a subscriber, a thumb up is appreciated. Feel free to share this channel with others. The MH370 incident deserves everybody's attention worldwide for the sake of safe public air traveling. This is the end of the series, MH370 Passenger Hijacking. The series is dedicated to Zahari Shah, the pilot in command, and his co-pilot, Farouk Ahmed. It is clear that MH370 is not at the bottom of the remote southern Indian Ocean. One day, when the evil masterminds are tried in the International Criminal Court, the world will find out where to find those innocents who were murdered by the evils. Rest in peace.